Aaron Dykes here with Melissa Melton for TRUTHstreammedia, and it's time to set the record straight about organic foods and those other guys.
Yeah, you guys may remember back in the fall of 2012, all over the mainstream media, story after story in NPR, NBC News, Reuters, organic food no healthier than non-organic, says this study. And it was a Stanford study that said that organic food may not necessarily be more nutritious than conventionally grown food. And there are studies that actually show that's not the case, but that's not even the point we want to make here today necessarily. I think actually Dr. Johnny Bowden here in the Huffington Post rebuffed this quite well in his article, The Organic Food Lie, where he talks about, for example, omega-3s. You don't take omega-3s because you think it's going to affect the unemployment rate or save your marriage. You take omega-3s because you think that they support your brain and heart health and lower your blood pressure based on studies, right? Well, the same kind of holds true with organic food. You eat organic food because of what it doesn't have, namely pesticides, pollutants, chemicals, carcinogens, and hormones, and antibiotics, and steroids in case of milk and meat. They just went on and on about how, nope, organic food's just not healthier for you, it's just not more nutritious. Again, there are studies that say that that's not the case, but that is not the point I'm getting at. This got them even more ridiculous about a month later when the American Academy of Pediatrics put out an official report saying organic foods may not be healthier for your kids. And they said current evidence does not support meaningful nutritional benefits, yada yada, blah blah. They did go on to say the report does cite lower pesticides in organic produce and potentially lower risk of exposure to drug-resistant bacteria. Two things which I kind of think are important, but whatever. But here's the real kicker. This is my favorite line here. But the needed long-term studies do not yet exist to show that eating pesticide-free food makes people healthier, says Joel Foreman, an associate professor of pediatrics at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York and co-author of the report. So this is a guy who teaches pediatrics. He teaches people how to be kid doctors. And yet he's saying the needed long-term studies don't exist that show eating pesticide-free food makes you healthier. So I don't have a long-term study that shows me that if I jump naked into a vat of rabid piranha fish, that might not be good for my health. I don't have that study because I have common sense. But what this guy who teaches people how to be kid doctors is saying is that because there's no study that says eating pesticide-free food makes you healthier, then it's just not true. Because apparently as a parent, you just can't use common sense, okay? Only scientists can tell you what you're supposed to feed your kids.
And just to inject a little common sense, most classes of pesticides are neurotoxins that work in insects and mammals. A bunch of them have been banned, but the more recent ones have their own major issues as well. A lot of them are endocrine disruptors, and bottom line, they're designed to kill things, and they accumulate in your body and in the food that you're eating.
Yeah, and just think how that affects even smaller people like children and babies.
So we should avoid pesticides. There's no reason to assume it's safe. Let's take a look at how many pesticides are really used.
Yeah, this is what people don't ever actually look at. This is a chart that shows different types of soy that have been grown and what kinds of chemicals have been used on them. So your top section here is going to be your Roundup Ready genetically modified soy. Your middle section is going to be conventional soy, and the bottom section is organic. And then the second column here is the different variety of seeds that were used. And as you can clearly see, this bottom section, organic, there's nothing there because they're not adding extra chemicals when they grow the food.
Not allowed to.
However, look at all of the chemicals that are being added to these conventional and genetically modified foods. I mean, you have sometimes 7 chemicals being added to these plants as they're growing that are supposed to end up on your dinner table. I mean, look at this. Cruiser Max, Tree Flan, you've got Roundup, you've got Power Max. Look at this up here, insecticide, Warhawk and Silencer. Because that's what I really want to put on a dinner plate that I'm handing to my child. Hey, here's some soybeans with some Warhawk and Silencer added to it. That sounds really healthy.
And these are real-world farms, so sometimes they use more, sometimes they use less. But an average in this study of 5 to 7 pesticides for conventional looks maybe like there's less pesticide with the genetically modified. But remember that Roundup they're using multiple times during the growing season.
I mean, here's the bottom line on this, okay? If you dumped all of these chemicals onto your food plate and gave that to your children, you'd go to jail because you'd probably kill your kid. because it'd be all at once, right? But these are small amounts in the food bioaccumulating over time, and it's being done by giant corporations, so that makes it somehow okay. It's not okay. You're eating all of this stuff. It's disgusting. I mean, let's look at this. Let's look at what did I bring up? Cruiser Max? Let's look at the label for Cruiser Max. It's an insecticide with fungicides. Its active ingredients are these 3 chemicals, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, but in huge letters, almost as big as the name of the product, it says, keep out of reach of children, caution. So your children aren't supposed to touch it, but apparently eating it is just totally fine.
And I've got specific data. You mentioned the Stanford study and their numbers of pesticide residues, but there's other more detailed numbers that take from 3 different data sets: USDA numbers, State of California numbers, and then the Consumers Union numbers. And they aggregated them all together and found that organic produce had 3 times less pesticide residue than conventional produce. And then another type called integrated pest management that's supposed to leave no detectable residue had more than twice as much pesticide residue than organic. So why does organic have any pesticide residue at all? Well, one major reason is because the soils are contaminated, and a lot of the pesticides that were discontinued and banned decades ago are still in the soils and getting on the foods. But that's not as bad. It's a problem, but it's not as bad with organic. Clearly a better choice. Keep in mind the conventional and even the genetically modified are uptaking those pesticides inside the plant. So it's not just what's on the outside, it's on the inside of the plant. And
yeah, you're not going to wash it off.
Yeah, and they've specifically done studies with glyphosate, that major Monsanto Roundup pesticide ingredient, that shows glyphosate inhibits photosynthesis. They looked at sugar beets in this study. They looked at algae in studies, and they've even looked at glyphosate's effects on glyphosate-resistant soybeans, that is the Roundup Ready GM soybeans, and found that they too are affected by glyphosate. It interrupts their photosynthesis and other key activities inside the plant, and obviously that will affect the nutrition to one level or another, because photosynthesis is how the plant produces its nutrition.
I mean, it's just amazing. This is the point. They want to go ahead and tell you that eating organic food is just some trendy thing that only, blonde soccer moms with $300 highlights can afford. But the point is that everybody needs to do whatever they can to try and eat healthier and afford this, because if you're not, you're feeding your family just basically a pile of chemicals. You wouldn't go under your kitchen sink and dump a bunch of bottles with like skull heads on them all over your food. You wouldn't do that. And yet somehow they're able to put 7 different seed treatments. They're putting it on in pre-planting. They're putting it on as it's growing, sometimes multiple times, insecticides, fungicides, all over the place. And this list doesn't even talk about the fact that a lot of the water that's being used to grow this stuff already has pesticide runoff in it. It's got fluoride in it. They use sulfuryl fluoride on certain kinds of fruits and nuts after it's been harvested, so that's being sprayed on there. I mean, how many chemicals do we need on our food to just eat it?
Well, that's the other thing in the data set. They found not only that there was more residue on conventional produce, 73% of all produce, but that it had more multiple pesticides, with the worst offenders having 14 different kinds of pesticide residues on them. Most of them grown with, like we said, 5 or 7 or maybe more pesticides.
This is just sad. Your grandparents used to just call it food. Now it's organic and they charge a premium for it. So you have to pay more just to eat food that doesn't have a ton of chemicals dumped all over it.
Well, look out for your children.
Yeah, if you have somebody that that wants to argue this point with you, show them this chart, okay? Show them this chart so they can see how many different really scary sounds. Warhawk? Warrior? I'm eating Warhawk, Warrior, and Silencer when I eat my food. Like, come on. Soybeans in this country, that's the second most highly subsidized food crop in the country. It's in freaking everything. So, this is going everywhere. It's in all kinds of foods. So, show people this chart. They need to see this. This is what's going on. That's the difference. That's the difference.
It accumulates, folks.